Hey family, it's Monica. Welcome to another episode of the Afrocentric Social Worker Podcast, where we're changing the conversation about the collective experiences of African Americans and centering on our need for restoration and healing. I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening. I have a very special guest with us today. It's Dr. Gregg Carr. He is the Associate Professor at Howard University for the Department of Afro-American Studies. And he's going to be talking to us about the importance of framing what we're seeing today in a historical and cultural context. He's going to give us some recommendations on the types of books and information that we can be consuming if we're wanting to heighten our political education as well as our historical education. Because as social workers, counselors, and helping professionals, it's very important for us to root these conditions and what we're seeing in the community in a cultural context, so we're not coming up with the same solutions that we've been doing before this decade of work actually started. So thank you, Dr. Carr, for being a part of the podcast, and welcome.
Well, thank you. And it's Greg. Please, Monica, it's a
Oh,
real pleasure.
thank you.
Absolutely. No, it's a pleasure to be with you and to be with your listeners and with the community, particularly of social workers. My very good friend, Joe Benton, who was one of the past presidents of the Association of Black Social Workers. I used to go down. In fact, I think the last time when we were in New Orleans, in ABSW, the great Morris FX Jeff, Dr. Jeff, one of our ancestors, used to sit under him. I know we know all these people. So, and I remember remarking to the social workers at that time, I said, our social workers, you're our first responders.
Yes.
I know we think of firefighters, we think of EMTs as first responders, and that's all true. They're trying to save lives. But when a social worker enters the space, what you all do is not only address the needs of the body, but the need of the spirit and the needs of the mind and the whole human being. And there's nothing that is more necessary and essential. And at the same time, there's nothing that's more rewarding, but there's also nothing that's more intense and more of a siphon on energy. So as I always used to say to Brother Joe, and I say to you and to everyone all of your colleagues and comrades, you got to take care of yourselves, not just in a moment like this, but always, because you are our social workers, and that is a responsibility that is, there's nothing more important in our society.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And that was kind of the sentiments of a lot of social workers with kind of what's been going on with the pandemic, and how there's been a lot of focus on nurses and doctors, but a lot of people don't know the critical role that social workers play in a lot of these conditions that we're seeing in the community. We're not just people who are going in and removing children from homes, but we're a lot of times the seat at the table who are kind of helping bring these in context, especially in a sociological perspective. So I appreciate you being here because I'm knowing that a lot of the social workers who I'm coming in contact with, we're learning about social problems, but we're not going far enough back to learning how they've developed and what they stem from. We're not really learning how to define racism from an Afrocentric perspective. And I know from our community standpoint, language is very important in terms of us being able to have our own ways of knowing, our own ways of being. And I hear you talk about that a lot. So I wanted us to kind of go back a little bit. Now, you're at Howard. How long have you been at Howard?
I've been at Howard. 2020 marks my 20th year. I came in the fall of the year 2000. So This is my second decade at Howard, finishing up my 20th year.
Okay. So what I wanted to do was ask you to provide us a little bit of context about HBCUs, how they came into being, and why did we need them at that time?
Well, we know our historically Black colleges and universities actually emerged, some of them before the Civil War in the United States, two in particular. 1837, there was a school developed in South Philadelphia for the education of Black students, at that time called colored students, I suppose, in the city. So it was called the Institute for Colored Youth. Some very famous folks associated with it include Fannie Jackson Coppin, who, of course, she and her husband, Coppin State, is named for the Coppin family in Baltimore. Octavius Catto, very important civil rights leader later. But the ICY would eventually relocate outside the city of Philadelphia into South Pennsylvania, and we know it today as Cheyney State University. Cheyney it was really the university that was responsible for training a lot of teachers over the years. In fact, Coretta Scott King's sister was on the faculty of Cheney for many years. So that was kind of like the first one, although the second one often claims it's the first because it was founded for undergraduate education instead of just growing out of another school. And that was in 1854, 55, 56. You have the establishment of something called the Ashman Institute that was eventually renamed for Abraham Lincoln. And that is now known as Lincoln University. It's also in Pennsylvania. And we know that the first two HBCUs were started before the Civil War, and they are technically in the North because the Mason-Dixon line, which traditionally is seen as dividing the North and the South in the United States, divides Pennsylvania and Delaware. So Pennsylvania is the first state north of the Mason-Dixon line, and Cheney and Lincoln both developed in southern Pennsylvania. So those are the first. But all the other HBCUs come into existence after the Civil War, during and after the Civil War. They are established for the education of the formerly enslaved. 1866, 67, you see Rusk College in Mississippi, you see Howard University in Washington, D.C., you see Fisk University in 1866 in Nashville, Tennessee. And so the idea is you must develop places to create a leadership class for the rest of these African people. Some 4 million of us had come out of enslavement, although disease, ironically, in a moment of pandemic, decimated up to as many as 1 million people coming out of enslavement got sick during this period. That time, dysentery, cholera, things for which there were no cure like yellow fever, really attacked Black people. So at any rate, Howard University was unique in the sense that it was the only HBCU that was founded through a charter that was approved by the federal government. So it became, in a sense, the national HBCU. Even though it was established for the training of teachers and ministers, teachers and preachers, as they often say, because the idea was this is what Negroes need, teachers and preachers. So some things that never changed, you know. But there's this tension from the beginning of HBCUs, because we have to understand, we know, and you know this as a social worker, and not only as that, but as a cultural worker and a thinker, our people are not of one mind about anything. And what you begin to see immediately is that there's a class tension that begins to emerge in Black communities. So the idea is we're going to create leaders. Yeah, but the Black communities didn't tell you all to be leaders. You're being recruited, and then you're saying, well, if I have an education, then I'm supposed to be the leader. And that's what makes HBCUs different. Whereas the HWCUs, and I don't use PWI, I think that if we're going to use normative language, as you said, we must use language that allows us to have a conversation that displaces whiteness. I think to me, this type of work that we're doing must decenter whiteness as the subject of our humanity. And whiteness, much of its power is in its invisibility. So we don't have to say white. But anytime you add the adjective Black, it implies in many ways that white is the norm. White is the center. So we say, oh, I got a Black Jesus at my church, or we dressed up, we had a Black Santa Claus. Okay, that can because Santa Claus is white. And by implication, Jesus is white. Why do you have to say Black Jesus? Because Jesus is not Black. So when you say historically Black college, well, what does that mean? Well, college is white, and now we have Black colleges. Yeah, okay. When we say HBCU, and what are you, Ohio State, where we both went to school? You're HWCU. You're historically white. What you don't get to do is pretend that education is white. And then we have, that's why I don't use the phrase Black excellence, for example. My students say, oh, it's Black excellence. I said, no, it's excellence. Let's be very clear, because if you're saying Black excellence, y'all still sneak around, try to go listen to Beethoven and Bach, both of whom I enjoy, but you think that that's somehow better than you make Black classical music. No. Don't do that to yourself. So at any rate, within the HBCUs, you see a class tension, but the thing that distinguishes HBCUs from HWCUs is that these people who went into them with the expectation that they would become leaders in the communities took that assignment seriously. You're not a leader because you go to school. You're a leader because your people sent you to school to get an education to serve the people. So it's very important to understand. We celebrate everyone who graduates from high school and college. I mean, even now we put little caps and gowns on kindergartners and first graders. This kind of thing, So we value education, but we don't just value education for people to get smart. No. Now, what are you going to do with us? Because we sent you there to get these tools to help us.
Right.
And I know that no one appreciates that better in terms of a craft than social workers, because you often stand between the state and young people and families attempting to acquire that education.
Right.
When you enter the home, like you said, it's not to take somebody away. It's like, how can we help you get these things that are going to keep your family together, keep you alive? And one of those things is schooling. It's very important. So that's one of the functions of HBCUs. And so finally, in terms of this first question, from the 1860s and 70s, you then see a proliferation of HBCU, some of them funded by Black people. The African Methodist Episcopal Church, for example.
Yes.
You usually know AME church schools because they, unlike many of the other schools, are named for Black people. Morris Brown, second bishop at AME Church, that's the school in Atlanta. Allen University, where Dave Chappelle's ancestors went when his grandfather was an AME church minister, that's in South Carolina. As I said, Coppin in Baltimore. Wilberforce is one of the few AME schools that's not named for a Black person, but of course Wilberforce right up the road from you, right there in near Dayton, you know. And then across the street from it, you see the state HBCU, Central State. In fact, there's a whole, I'm sure you know, there's a whole beef between Wilberforce and Central State that starts with the split, because you know, Central State was supposed to be the Ohio State University for Negroes, but Wilberforce is controlled by Black people. So there's a tension there. The first president of Wilberforce, Charles Wesley, had been the president of, first president of Central State, Charles Wesley, had been the president of Wilberforce. He walked across the street and started Central State and took most of the faculty of Wilberforce with him. So it's a whole, but the state HBCUs come into existence because white people did not want Black people to go to school.
Yes.
So what you see then is the agricultural and mechanical schools were like schools that came out of the late 1800s, late 19th century, for the training of people to go into these fields, agriculture, mechanics. So Texas starts the Texas Agricultural and Technical College, you know, Texas Agricultural and Mechanical College, Texas A&M. Right. But they're not gonna let Black people go there. So what do? You start the Prairie View State College for Negroes. That's Prairie View A&M. In Tennessee, we know where I'm from, you have a degree from a school in Tennessee, as we know. They had the University of Tennessee. And then they say, well, we're going to start Tennessee Agricultural and Industrial State College for Negroes, Tennessee A&I. That's the school we now know as Tennessee State. Right. In the state of Florida, one more example, you have, of course, the Florida State University. That's for white people. In the same city, Tallahassee, and many of the HBCUs are in state capitals because that's after the Civil War. A lot of Black people moved to state capitals in the South. You start the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical State College for Negroes. That's Florida A&M. So anytime you see an HBCU with an A&T or A&M, that's the Black version of the white school in the state. And those are Jim Crow schools. But they produced a powerful leadership class. And so that's where we are in terms of the history of the institutions now. Just a little over 100, fluctuate 105, 106. And I'm really terrified because the pandemic could very much put at threat some of the smaller HBCUs, particularly the private ones, because they rely on tuition. They rely on room and board to keep their doors open.
Right. And that kind of segues into our next question that I wanted to ask you, because when the schools were formed, you wouldn't think that, or it wasn't this influx or this wave of white people entering into HBCUs. Then they didn't even want to be educated with Black people. But now where we are in terms of where HBCUs are in the lack of funding, we know that that's been a big issue for HBCUs. They're wanting to get their numbers and their recruitment up. You're seeing a lot of white students entering into HBCUs. Do you foresee that with that happening, that it will invalidate the need for an HBCU, or where do you foresee that going with more white students enrolling into HBCUs?
It's a very good question, and it's an intriguing observation. There will always be a need for historically Black colleges and universities. And it's important to note that historically Black colleges and universities never discriminated against white students coming to learn at them, at least in terms of the faculties of those schools, the students of those schools, the staff of those schools. They were prohibited by law. So if you had a white attempt to enroll at HBCU, they would be barred by law. So when people say, oh yeah, the HBCUs, you know, they're racist, they exclude white people, okay, you just don't know. here's how it worked. When they started the school, they said no whites allowed, just like they said no blacks allowed at the white school. So
Yeah.
even white people who would want to go couldn't go.
Right.
The exception to that, well, there are a couple of exceptions in terms of the private schools, but the exception to that is Howard, because Howard was founded in 1867. And the Civil War, of course, was over, but this was during the period of Reconstruction, and they're passing what are known as the Reconstruction Amendments to the federal Constitution. The 13th Amendment abolishes enslavement or involuntary servitude, except if you're being punished for a crime. So it really doesn't get rid of slavery as much as it redefines it, puts it with criminality, right?
Yes.
The 14th Amendment establishes equal protection under the law and says that you must have due process of law. You know, we know that that's a spotty thing in terms of how courts interpret it, but the law is there. And then finally, of course, the 15th Amendment, which says if there's going to be an election, you cannot prohibit Black men at first from voting. And then after the 19th Amendment, Black women, which is why we have to have a civil rights movement, because the law on the book says you can't discriminate by race. Right. Well, Howard is founded in 1867, right in the middle of passing these amendments. And so since it has a federal charter, it cannot, by federal law, discriminate. The first students at Howard University, the entering class of Ohio State, this entering class of Howard University was predominantly white. White women, daughters of the founders of Howard University, who were white, including General Oliver Otis Howard. So it never discriminated. But the other HBCUs.
Well, can I stick on that point for a minute? How did that happen to where it was founded for previously enslaved Africans after the Civil War, but predominantly white women started to attend? How did that happen?
Well, I think in terms of the investment, the vision of the founders who were white, the idea was that if this school is truly supposed to be a world-class university, then it's good enough for our children too. I think that was the personal investment, and it made a statement.
Yeah.
The legal side, of course, is you can't discriminate by race. So it wasn't like they had to fight, and they were the founders. Right. However, this has always been a source of tension at Howard between some of my friends and colleagues who like to say, well, Howard was never an HBCU because it was interracial from the beginning. And people like me that say, yeah, that's a cute little nuance, but let's be very clear. This is an HBCU, of course it is. And the tension is because it was established for the training of teachers and preachers, but the teachers and preachers who were to be trained didn't necessarily have to be Black to serve Black people. But as I remind my friends often, very quickly after it opened its doors, the rush of people who came were not white people, but Black people. Right. Formerly enslaved Africans, just like the other HBCUs. So Howard ain't never been, except maybe the first couple of years, predominantly white. Right. It became overwhelmingly Black, exceedingly Black. And these Black people, and this is the beauty of our HBCUs, we see it all over. I mean, most historically Black colleges have a history book. Yeah. So if you're interested in the history of an HBCU, look for the history book on that school, and you will find some of the most heroic tales in world history. I mean, you got Black people coming out of enslavement, not only in their teens, but in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70-year-old Black people showing up at a place that becomes South Carolina State University, showing up at a place that becomes Claflin University, Claflin, South Carolina State, right next door to each other there in Orangeburg, South Carolina, showing up at what becomes North Carolina A&T, showing up at Delaware State, what becomes Delaware State, or Howard University, showing up unable to read. So they enter a place like Howard in what they call the night school. Okay, you can't do your alphabet. How old are you? 38. Okay, come on. A, B, and staying there over the years, and not only getting that degree that allows them to go to college, going to college at the same place, getting that degree, and on several occasions continuing to the point where some of these people who came to Howard unable to read or write as grown people got law degrees, became lawyers. And I mean, these are you look, I'm a comic book fan. I love Black Panther and all that. Wakanda is not real. We don't need stories of science fiction. Just look back at what we did. And you know, particularly when we're thinking about social workers, when we're thinking about people who intervene in people's lives, what does it mean to enter a home where a child finds that she feels like she has no hope?
Mm.
and to say, let me show you somebody who is around your age. And this is from let's go to 1890s. Let's go to Holly Springs, Mississippi, a little place just over the border from Memphis, Tennessee. Let's go to a sister named Ida Bell Wells, who was born and raised in the shadow of Rust College, 1866, Holly Springs, Mississippi. Let's go there and see that the yellow fever killed her parents, and she had to raise her siblings with no parents. And then she moves to Memphis to get a job as a teacher. And when she's in Memphis, she figures out a way not only to raise her family, but to get the education and to go on to become an incredible journalist. Understand what Marcus Garvey said: what people have done, people can do.
Yeah.
So the HBCUs help us understand it might look hopeless, but imagine what it was like to have been being beaten by a lash. And then 2 months later, you sitting in a schoolroom talking about I'm gonna change my life. That's really the HB. But in terms of what the question you asked, the question of, here we are in 2020. Pandemic is going to erode the base financial support for many schools, not just Black schools.
Right.
Number one, do we still need HBCUs? Well, the question becomes, do we still have our people at risk in harm's way? Yes. Okay, so the answer is yes, we do need the HBCUs then, because they are intervening. They are founded for that purpose, and they continued in that purpose through Jim Crow, through integration. Then the question becomes, well, they're open to everybody. Yeah, the law changed. Everybody can come. Can white people come? Not only can white people come, white people have been coming since the Jim Crow laws ended, and more have been coming over the last generation because HBCUs tend to be cheaper.
Yeah.
HBCUs tend to offer equal or better education in many areas. And I know that, I guess, what do they call the professional association? The White Professional Association is the National Association of Social Workers.
Yeah, NASW, yes.
Right. And here it is again, NASW, and then NABSW. You know what I'm saying? So, but I know there's a Black caucus in the NASW, which means SW don't mean y'all. You need your own meeting in the SW for the BSW. So Black people, when they founded the NABSW, they're like, you know what? Later for that. I'll pay my dues to the NASW, but I'm going to the NABSW because that's where I don't have to explain my humanity. And guess what white people found out? You know what? When I go to a Black school, I'm the minority. And these Black people don't treat me the way they would be treated in a white space, in a white caucus at the HBCU. What? You don't need no white caucus. Guess what? Because here, we're all human beings, and we're not going to hang no race bag on you. So what white students have found over the years is going to HBCUs, they get a better understanding not only of Black humanity, but of their own humanity. And I found particularly in the service professions, because Howard University's School of Social Work goes back to Annabelle Lindsay, who was this sister was a major force in 1940s and 50s. And here's an interesting book by my colleagues, Ruby Gordine and Annie Brown, Howard University School of Social Work in the 1970s.
Oh,
and,
wow.
social action, advocacy, and agents of change. And what Ruby and Annie do, they talk about the history of Howard's School of Social Work in the context of the history of Black social workers. And what we see in the 1970s is that your people, your antecedents, those Black social workers literally created a Black world. And they create a Black world not only at Howard, but at other HBCUs, and then Black folks in white schools connected with them. And what we find is today in 2020, there are white people who come get an MSW from Howard University because they know they want to work in Black communities, and they can't get the type of education that they would need to do that at a Hopkins, at a University of Chicago, at a Florida State. No, I'm going to the HBCU to get my social work training because I know the population I want to work with. So that's valuable for white people. Now, the other thing is, after Jim Crow, and we're talking about the 1960s and 70s, after the laws were changed, white schools that had protested to prevent Black students from enrolling at them began to admit Black students, but they typically fall into two categories: high achieving Black students. So that's why you see these young people at University of Alabama, for example, Arthur and Lucy and them, University of Georgia, when you see Charlene Hunter, now Charlene Hunter Galt, when they integrate the universities in the South in particular, when they integrate those schools, they're the best students, top of their class at these Black high schools, this kind of thing. So that's one category still. The other category, they figure out, wait a minute, we can use these Black athletes.
Mm.
Prior to Jim Crow, all the top Black athletes were, of course, at Black schools.
Right.
And so you had situations where white schools would think, oh, maybe we should scrimmage. Now, you don't want to scrimmage these Black schools. So they wouldn't even play the Black schools because they would be humiliated. They would get killed. You know what I'm saying? But here we are in 2020. Okay, we'll take the valedictorian, and we want all the football and basketball players. We want all the girls play basketball and run track for your school to come do it for the University of Virginia, to do it at Clemson, to do it at that very same University of Alabama that stopped Black people from enrolling, makes all their money off of Black bodies running up down the football field. So for them, that's integration. We want what we want from you. But meanwhile, Alabama State, Talladega, all those Black school HBCUs in Alabama have to worry about their budgets because they are not prioritized by these racist state legislatures. So HBCUs are at risk with the pandemic. So I think, yes, so in 10-second summary, yes, they're necessary, continue to be necessary. Yes, white students go there and see that value. And yes, now we have to be vigilant because integration has eaten away at the students who would normally go there, and the funding is always under attack. So we have to be vigilant in order to preserve these HBCUs, not just for Black people, but for everyone.
Right. And one of the things that I've been seeing in the media has been talks about the funding for HBCUs and whether or not that funding has increased with the presidencies that we've had. Have you seen that trajectory of funding change much between the presidencies?
Not under recent presidencies.
Okay.
And I say that for this reason. Before Jim Crow, there's never been equitable funding for historically Black colleges.
Right.
So we can start there. But under segregation, there was inequitable funding. However, in order to maintain Jim Crow, there was an investment sometimes in physical plant, like especially the A&T and the A&M and the A&I schools, because they were agricultural schools. Right. So you see capital outlay for land, for building purchase. And it was like, now this is the Negro college, but we're going to make sure y'all got tight buildings. We got plenty land. And you saw innovative educators. This is the area, as far as I'm concerned, of the greatest HBCU administrators. These are the presidents who were able to parlay and do the politics and keep these things fairly strong. Now, during and after Jim Crow, now we're talking about the 1960s, after desegregation, you see the unequal funding lay bare. And that's when the great legal minds began to attack unequal funding at the HBCUs through use of that 14th Amendment. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, which kind of undergirds the 14th Amendment, has something called Title VI. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the part of that legislation which deals with addressing inequity in higher education. And so what you saw is a series of lawsuits filed beginning in the late 60s. In Tennessee, it was Geyer, the Geyer case, Rita Sanders Geyer. In Mississippi, it was the Ayers case, Ayers versus Fordyce eventually. And other states, what you see is Black people went into court and said, look, you're giving Tennessee State X number of dollars, but then you give the University of Tennessee and them so much more. We're suing because you're maintaining a dual system of higher education through the funding. You're not funding the Black schools. The courts come back with a mixed bag. One of the solutions proposed is, well, let's just merge the schools and get rid of HBCUs. Then the Black people were like, no, that's not what we're talking about. And then the response was, yes, but you're racially identifiable. Well, hell, you racially identifiable too. Again, the invisibility of whiteness is used. Well, we'll just merge you all. And in fact, in Tennessee, this case, the Geyer case, rather than merge Tennessee State, they decide they're going to build a campus in downtown Nashville called the University of Tennessee at Nashville to compete with Tennessee State, rather than give Tennessee State money. Then the judge comes in and says, nah, y'all going to merge, and Tennessee State is going to take over that downtown campus. So it was the first time in American history that a Black school merged with and took over a white school. And they were mad about that. Some people still mad about that, but they're dying out now. So soon we won't be hearing from them except from the graveyard. But at any rate, but that's number one. They want to merge the schools. Then the court, they go back in court, these great lawyers. One of my friends, Alvin Chambliss out of Mississippi, he was on the Ayers case. I went to law school at Ohio State. I'll never forget the first time I met Alvin Chambliss. We were in a meeting at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in New York. I was clerking there. And Al Chambliss is in the room like, look, you Negroes want this money from these white people, but you're willing to risk the identity of your schools. We don't have to give up our identity to get our money. So the Ayers case says you got to give more money to Jackson State. You got to give more money to Mississippi Valley State. You got to give more money to Alcorn State, to these state schools. And you're not going to give them more money by merging them with Ole Miss, by merging them with Mississippi State. No, you're going to give them more money because they deserve more money, and not giving them more money is racist. Right. So this is what happens. The solution is you create a situation where you say, we will give, meaning the state, we will give new programs to HBCUs that will attract non-Black students as well, and that will justify us giving them more money. So they may put an engineering program at Jackson State, or computer science program at Alcorn State. And the idea is, no matter your background, if you want to get a good degree in this emerging field, you will want to go there because it's cheaper. And so that's how they begin to attract more students. Mm-hmm. So here's where it comes in terms of funding in other places. In the state of Maryland.
We're talking about funding under the United States president, correct?
Oh yeah. I'm going to come to that in a second. Okay, yes. Because yes, and I should have said that at the very beginning. Federal funding comes from the federal budget. Mm-hmm. The federal budget is passed by the United States Congress, which has the power of appropriation. Mm-hmm. The president proposes a budget, has to negotiate with Congress for the budget, and signs off on the budget or can veto the budget. But the budget itself is produced by the Congress, because Congress has the power to spend. Mm-hmm. A budget is a political document, mm-hmm. meaning that when the president says, this is what I want to fund, and then you see it in the newspaper, you see it on television, you see it and then like, they're cutting that. No. The president can propose whatever he or she wants. Right. But Congress is the one that decides ultimately. So typically what happens under presidents is the president will announce a budget priority in order, it's like propaganda. Mm-hmm. I don't think that we should be paying for people to be able to terminate a pregnancy. So in my budget, I zeroed out any appropriation for any money that will be spent on abortions. Mm-hmm. And then the news goes crazy. They're cutting. No. It's got to go to Congress now. Congress is like, oh, that's cute. That's very nice. Okay, we're restoring the money here for this. We're restoring the money here. And you can veto it if you want. But you just did that to get political support, and we don't have to pass that. Yeah. So when we hear presidents say, I want to increase funding for HBCUs, mm-hmm. that's an idea. It's got to make it through Congress.
Okay.
So every president, so this is where it becomes very interesting. But understand, education is at the state level. So HBCUs that are public are funded by the states, mm-hmm. Not the federal government.
Right.
What the federal government can do is propose programs and appropriate money for programs that can enhance those budgets, typically mm-hmm. through grants. So if you're an engineering professor, say at Morehouse Private School, let's say that you're partnering with an engineering professor from Fort Valley State in Georgia, a public school. And let's say that you got colleagues on that same team from Emory University, a private school, white school. Mm-hmm. And they've got somebody on there from Georgia State, Black school. Mm-hmm. You put a grant together, apply to the federal government, say we have 2 HBCU professors, 2 HWC professors, and y'all got some money for a minority grant, a STEM grant. You might get that grant because you got Black professors on it or Black college professors on it. And then that money comes to Morehouse as well. That money comes to Fort Valley as well. Let's say it's a $10 million grant and you split it up 4 ways and everybody get $2.5 million. And then some of that money then enhances the budget of that school. But that isn't a direct money infusion to the HBCUs. It comes through the faculty through application for federal dollars through grants. Mm-hmm. The other way you do it is to target programs specifically for HBCUs. Building renovation for historical purposes, for example, or enhancing education programs for students at HBCUs. So that's the kind of thing presidents can propose that will enhance money for HBCUs, but they aren't wholesale funding budgets. Those budgets in public HBCUs come from the states. In private HBCUs, it comes from their endowments, from fundraising, from the institutions they're affiliated with. And that's why the private ones are always in a little bit more difficult. Harvard's a private school. It's got dozens of billions of dollars in
Yeah.
endowment. The Johns Hopkins University, private school, $30-some billion endowment. Stillman College, a private school, tiny endowment, few $1 million maybe. You can't really, so if you don't open your doors and you don't have that tuition, you don't have that room and board, you can't make your payroll. Right. So it's a difficult thing. So presidents can steer money to private schools through creating programs for them to apply for federal dollars. National Endowment of the Arts grant, for example. You see this sometimes. Talladega College in Alabama. Talladega has these incredible murals. So there's a federal program that came in and said, we're going to restore the murals in the chapel. We're going to restore, and we're going to give y'all X number $1 million for that. And there's enough money there to not only do that work, but to help put in the general fund. I mean, so it's that kind of work. Yeah. President by president. Oh, I should finish on. So Title VI, one of the ways you get money is to say, we're going to put programs at HBCUs to attract people. And by law, the white schools who don't have those programs cannot establish those programs now, because you'll be competing and and creating that dual system of higher education. Right. In Maryland, this is the recent Maryland case. In Maryland, they gave specific programs, the state did, to public HBCUs like Morgan State University, Coppin State University, the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, which has an incredible tourism major. And they actually have a hotel on campus for hotel management. Yeah, so here it is. Well, I don't want to go to school, Black people. Well, you want to go into hotel management? Yeah, well, that program is over there on the Eastern Shore. Well, all right, I'll go. Because and it's like a top notch, so you're gonna go. And they use that money, build out a new hotel. They got a beautiful it's a beautiful campus. But here, the University of Maryland decides, oh yeah, y'all gave that executive MBA program to Morgan State. Well, we're gonna start one too. And then and the Black college, no, wait a minute, no. We got that to attract students. And then so the president of the chancellor of the University of Maryland was like, yeah, we're gonna do it anyway, sue us. So they did. The public HBCUs sued, went to court, and the judge found, Maryland, you're in violation. And so they're working now to settle that case. The proposed number passed by the legislature was $550 million to the 4 HBCUs to be split up between Coppin, between Morgan, between the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and Bowie State University, the 4 HBCUs in Maryland. Split that money 4 ways because they violated Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which means that triggers the 14th Amendment. They reset a dual system of higher education. The legislature in Maryland passed it. Say, yes, give them the money. The money, a couple of weeks ago, was vetoed by the Republican governor, Larry Hogan. He said, nah, we got this crisis. We don't have the kind of money. Then he turned around and gave like $100 million to Pimlico horse race track. I mean, it's all kinds of stuff. Larry Hogan's a wonderful racist. He trying to pretend like he's not. But at any rate, this is the struggle for funding. Presidents send a message of priority for HBCUs, just like they do with budgets, through what they publicly say.
Yeah, that's the part that I was wanting to get to, because there's been a lot of talk about funding increasing under the Trump presidency. And I'm wanting to help people understand how true that is, if it's more propaganda.
I see. Oh, I got you. So the answer is, the answer to that question is very simple. It doesn't matter. What do I mean by that? As we've established, Congress passes the budget.
Right.
But as we should probably establish, there has been no president who has proposed a level of resource support in any of their budgets that would be equitable. Right. Not Lyndon Johnson, certainly not Richard Nixon, not after Nixon, Gerald Ford, not after Ford, Jimmy Carter, not after Jimmy Carter, Ronald, who shall remain nameless, not George H.W. Bush, not Bill Clinton, not George W. Bush twice, not Barack Obama, and not Donald Trump. So if you don't say, you know what, let's give $1 billion to HBCUs. Now that ain't happening. What happened is, you know what, I want to create a program where we give, $3.5 million to be split up between 100 HBCUs. Okay, there ain't no money. So then you come along and say, I want to give $3.6 million. Look, there's been an increase. I mean, no, do you understand that none of these presidents, including the one that people like to claim, Barack Obama, and let's be very clear, there is no reason to claim Barack Obama when it comes to HBCUs. Barack Obama is, let me just say this as delicately as I can. Perhaps perhaps our great-grandchildren, by then they probably won't be United States, but if there's the United States, perhaps our great-grandchildren will be able to have a cool, calm, dispassionate analysis of Barack Obama presidency.
Yeah.
But until then, Black people are so blinded by optics that we cannot talk intelligently about a man who did not support HBCUs, in fact, damaged HBCUs.
Right.
Because one of the major sources for HBCUs, particularly private ones, is tuition. One of the major subsidizers of tuition for students who don't have a lot of money, I got to tell you that you're a social worker, all your colleagues, you in here with these families, we ain't got no money.
Yes.
Which means when we fill out our FAFSA, our financial aid form, our expected family contribution is close to, or a lot of times, zero.
Yeah.
That means we are eligible for Pell Grants.
Right.
That means we're eligible for low or no interest federal student loans. Now, under the Obama administration, they changed the rules for federal student loans, which not only made it harder for poor people to get federal loans, eliminated a pathway for many of them, and overwhelmingly, that hurt the HBCUs. Now I can't get this federal loan, which means I can't go to school, and my school doesn't get the money, and this is under the first Black president.
Right.
You understand? So Barack Obama, through his neglect, Barack Obama, who, when I came to Howard about 3 years in, there was the junior senator from Illinois decided he's going to run for president. So he came to Howard to speak at commencement, Barack Obama. I'm not commencement, at a convocation we had. It's Barack Obama. Barack Obama ran for president. Everybody, oh yeah, it's 2003, man, it's 2004, this kind of thing. Obama, no, I'm sorry. He won the Senate in 2005. So this must have been 2006, 2007. Okay. He runs for president. He wins. We don't see Barack Obama again until May of his final 6 months in office, when he comes back to give the commencement speech. Now, I saw his wife a number of times, saw his wife's mother a number of times. Ms. Robinson used to come to chapel at Howard University. But we ain't see the champion of the Negro, Barack Hussein Obama, again. Come and vote for me. Okay, now, he done all this, and it's a metaphor for his neglect of HBCUs. Barack Obama, and then of course, I guess he got hyped for HBCUs now because everybody wanted to talk, so he gave a little halfway commencement speech a couple of weeks ago. Barack Obama ain't never shown no love for HBCUs. And his loan policy, which he was widely criticized for by HBCU presidents, in fact, damaged Black students all over, and specifically damaged HBCUs. So here comes Trump. HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. You could take those 4 letters and tattoo them on that man's orange forehead, and he couldn't remember what they stand for, and might not even remember how to say them in sequence. He don't know nothing about no HBCUs. So, but a budget is a propaganda campaign. So what does he do? He gets an HBCU graduate, Omarosa Manigault, and I'm not saying, say my friend Omarosa Manigault, who's very interesting. Politically, we ain't gonna agree on a lot of stuff, but in terms of how she was trying to maneuver, she made a lot of mistakes. But one thing, because Omarosa went to Central State. She got a degree from Central State and a degree from Howard. So she's up under Trump because of all the nefarious stuff they was doing together in terms of their politics and, make strange allies. But she's like, look, here's one of the things you could actually make some inroads in the Black community. Everybody know you're a racist, but this HBCU thing, if you throw a couple of dollars over here, so what do? With Omarosa in his ear, they move the office of HBCUs. They have an office, the president's office for HBCUs. They move it into direct report to Donald Trump. Obama didn't do that. So now Trump gets to go out and say, see, I thought that was y'all man. He didn't even have the HBCU thing. No, they report directly to me. Then he meets, he's going to talk to the HBCU. So, our people, oh man, well, he did do that. No, go do some research. Ain't no president ever given no whole lot of money in their budget to HBCUs. And this is window dressing. Yes. So then, then there's the idea, when you send your budget over to Congress, yes, you increase access to grants in a program here or something like that. But because the prior administration didn't have any money or very little money, if you put $10 million in the budget, you can say it was a substantial increase. Yeah, Just like if I gave you $1 and then my friend gave you 5, you could say, "Oh my God, what is that? That's a 1,000% increase." Yeah, and I still can't put enough gas in my car.
Exactly.
But I'm glad to have 5 rather than 1. But I really need 45. Is that, yeah? Well, I'm not giving you. None of us giving you $45. So yeah, that's why anybody wanting to research this, all you have to do is look up the President's Commission on HBCUs under each president, going back to Carter, and you'll see that this is we're talking about peanuts.
Right. And that's why I think it's so important for us to have these conversations, because if we just go with the narrative of the media, or if we don't do our own research, if we don't ask the right questions, then we won't come up with the correct answer. So we can't always just go with that public narrative and then run with it without really looking at how does this really impact Black people? How does this really impact HBCUs? And how does this really impact the work that we're doing every day?
Yes. And ultimately, we're the ones who are going to solve these problems.
Yes.
And you're exactly right. When we remember not only that we're the ones who are going to solve them, but we are the ones who have solved them, these other conversations become marginal conversations. That's right. And we also learn to advocate for ourselves, because I don't think Barack Obama, well, I started to say I don't think Barack Obama was against HBCUs, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think because Obama's rhetoric tended to make me believe that he thought that the schools were inferior. And I respect that. I do, because this is a display of ignorance that is fairly consistent with Barack Obama.
Right.
There's a mix of ignorance and arrogance in Barack Obama's political career that I think we sometimes miss. He's no doubt brilliant, but he's not nearly as smart as he thinks he is. So
and I think that's important too, because we get blinded by kind of identity politics, or people who we feel represent our interests but really don't speak to our interests.
That's right.
So when we get this affinity to people or feel like we have this connection, sometimes we're not as critical to analyze their work or their policy. So I think in the evolution of how we come into being a more politically minded people, that we have to know is not personal, but I need to see, what are you really doing? What does this really mean for me? How is this really going to impact the community, without always being so emotional around the decisions and the talking points that people have when they come into the community.
That's right, Sister Monica. And I ain't got to tell you, we both know very well that had Barack Obama going to Morehouse instead of Occidental, if he had gone to FAM instead of Columbia, and if he had gone to law school at North Carolina Central or Texas Southern or Howard instead of Harvard, that he probably he would have been extremely brilliant there, and he would have run into some extremely brilliant sisters and brothers who'd have been like, "Okay, Barack, we hear what you're saying, but that's bullshit, bro."
Yeah.
So you can't be the smart Negro in a Black school like you are the smart Negro in a white school. There's like, "Oh yeah, Barack," here we like, "Yeah, you smart, bro, and I'm smart too. So let's mix it up." And I think it would have made him a better person in terms of being able to deal with policy. But some people are not built for that. They'd rather be the smart exception.
Right.
Rather be the smart exception.
Yeah. Now, another one of the reasons why I wanted to talk with you is because you have such a breadth of information around a lot of different topics. So I could have asked you to talk about anything, HBCU, politics, culture. It's so well-rounded. So one of the things that I wanted us to discuss is kind of what we're seeing today, and how historically we've seen these moments before, in terms of our activism, in terms of our organizing, but there's a sentiment that we're missing the mark in what we're doing and how we've traditionally done things, because we've had a lot of movements, but not a lot of momentum on the policies that change the conditions in the community.
Yes.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is where we are right now. What are some missteps or some decisions that we're making as a group of people that, had we done the work on our history and really explored and analyzed previous movements, that maybe we wouldn't be doing that right now in this current movement?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, what you're doing right now is the answer to prepare us for what we need to do. And that means what we're doing is we're asking that question, and we're doing it recognizing that there is an answer, meaning recognizing in our experiences, we have the solutions.
Yes.
And so for folks listening to this conversation, this ongoing conversation that you're having, that, you know, you're allowing me to participate in this session, it's important to understand that just asking that question has set the foundation for us to be able to answer it.
Yeah.
It might seem obvious, but there are people who think every crisis we face is the first time we faced it.
Right. And that's not
you know what I'm saying? Because they don't ask the question that you raised. Well, what have we learned? Okay, so there's something to learn? Yeah. Okay, well, what is it? Okay, now you're looking in the right direction.
Right.
But man, what are we gonna do? Well, what did we do last time? Wait, there was the last time? Yeah.
We don't even have to go back that far. We don't have to go back to civil rights. We can go to 2014 with Mike Brown and Ferguson.
Come on.
To really gather some things that we can do to not continue to do the same thing.
That's exactly right. Okay. In fact, I'm glad you raised that. Let's use, I was talking to somebody the other day about this. Let's use a quick example, not related to HBCUs, but related to what kind of things trigger other things. Freddie Gray, Baltimore, spring 2015. Up until then, anybody watching CNN knows that Black people used to berate Don Lemon. Black people were like, Don Lemon, you Uncle Tom, why would you say that about Black people? But I was in Baltimore that spring, May, and I remember Don Lemon and them standing out there in that little enclosure outside Baltimore City Hall, surrounded by police. Something went off in Don Lemon in the wake of what happened to Freddie Gray and the insurrections around this country that moved Don Lemon in another direction. So ever since then, it's like Don Lemon been getting blacker every week. Like, what the hell happened to Don Lemon? Because we don't remember, to your point. Well, what happened? We don't even remember 2015. Yeah. So now you got somebody turn on CNN and say, yeah, Don Lemon rides for us. Slow down.
Right.
He's riding for us now.
Yeah.
But if you don't understand history, you don't understand that one of the things that happens to our people is, particularly when we have a racial trauma, it creates an awakening. Yeah. See, you know, you're a licensed social worker. You deal with people's minds. You know, you understand the impact of trauma in ways that I don't, and those of us who are not professional don't. What happens to a trauma that sets off a trigger? Don Lemon had a traumatic experience, clearly in some way that brought him into that space. But if you don't study the past, you can't. And then now going forward, how do we help these Black people understand? Okay, we don't want to impose trauma on them, but what we need to have them to understand is you are Black in America. So understand the impact of that realization, and then we're going to give you some tools to negotiate with that. Why? Don Lemon's a trained journalist, which means now I'm going to use the tools I have to address this problem. But in order for me to see it was a problem, I had to face something that was uncomfortable for me. Right. That's the process. And you know it better than I do, because you have to deal with students and young people, old people who deal with trauma every day.
Yeah.
So I think in that regard, when we think about the study of the past and looking for solutions in this moment, it really behooves us to take a specific problem we want to address and then look backward. So when you say we missed the mark for example, actually I love that. I love the way you phrase that. I'll tell you why. 1933, a man who was born in West Virginia, who worked in coal mines till he was 18 years old before he could go to high school, finished high school in 2 years, went to college at Berea College in Kentucky, one of the only integrated schools in the South, left there, eventually got a PhD from Harvard University, the second Black person to get it. The first person who got it in history was W.B. Du Bois. This brother got a PhD. He spent his whole life as a teacher, as a writer, and in 1933, he's born in 1875. His parents had been enslaved. By 1933, he's in his 50s, and he's saying, you know what? Y'all love preachers too much. Y'all ain't serious about this and that. Let me go back here and study this. And he puts together a series of newspaper essays in Black press, and then he puts them all together in one book. And in 1933, he publishes his book of essays on what we need to do. He titles it The Miseducation of the Negro. Yeah. Carter G. Woodson. And in that book, he's got a chapter entitled How We Missed the Mark. This is 1933. You know what I'm saying? He said, we missed the mark. Now this man, his parents were enslaved. Yeah. Understand? His parents came out of slavery, James and Eliza. Neither one of them could read or write English. her brothers were both veterans of the Civil War. One of the things they learned to do in the Civil War is read and write. So his uncles are the ones who taught him and his brothers and sisters how to read and write, because the parents were like, all our children need to read and write. They knew coming out of slavery, education, very important. When his mother was a little girl, she jumped down on the auction block and said, sell me rather than sell my mother and my brother apart. I mean, so in other words, these are the traumas that he worked in a coal mine with black men who could not read. And after they would get off their shift, they would go to one of the brothers' house, and his job was to read the black newspapers to these other brothers. In other words, they was like, look, we need to understand this, young buck. You can read these. I mean, so he carried all that stuff, and he's looking at our people. This ain't 2020. This isn't the achievement gap. This is the 19 teens and 20s, 1890s. And he says, I'm tired now. We have been miseducated.
Yeah.
These are the black schools. And he says, how we missed the mark. He said, you know how we missed the mark? We have begun to forget that education isn't just for your individual progress. It's for the group.
Yeah.
And white people's ice is not colder. The white man is not superior. We have missed the mark by knowing that we can do this ourselves. And so he's laying all this stuff out. That's why I suggest one of the books that we should always go back and read is Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro.
Yes.
I mean, you know, we put it on t-shirts. We know the name Woodson. We say, oh, the Miseducation of the Negro. No. Go back and read it. It's like he wrote it today. You say, yes, like he wrote. No. Make a study group and just go chapter by chapter and update it.
Yeah.
All the solutions in 2020 are in the book from 1933.
Wow.
And I would even say, go right to that chapter, How We Missed the Mark. And you can just line up. Because in 2020, we look back and say, you know what? Jim Crow was bad. Segregation was terrible. However, we did have these heroes like Carr G. Woodson. Professor Woodson, what would you say? Hero? Hero? No. We missed the mark. In other words, Woodson is so. But what it shows us is, even when we're being critical, we still achieve.
Right.
Because Woodson built a black publishing company. Woodson created Negro History Week in 1926. And Carl Woodson was not a pledged member of a fraternity or sorority. It's very important to understand, because there weren't any when he went to school.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting phenomenon that happened in the first like 30, 40 years of black fraternities and sororities. The black fraternities and sororities went back into the 19th century and made honorary members of the famous black people. Freddie Douglass didn't go to school at all, but the Alphas made him an honorary Alpha. How you gonna make? They went and got Du Bois. Du Bois said, "Ain't with no Alphas at Harvard or Fisk." He said, "Well, we want you to be Alpha." The Qs, the Omegas, went back and got Woodson. Woodson was like, "Yeah, I'll join, but here's what I want." Well, you want something? Yeah, I want you brothers. I'm gonna join y'all, but I want you brothers to help me with this little project I got. And it was Omega Psi Phi that put Negro History Week on its back and spread it throughout the country. So this is important, because now in 2020, we think all the fraternities and sororities, they step in, they got all the social stuff and they bougie. Yeah, all of that is absolutely true. And it's also true that at their best, they become a network, the AKAs, the Deltas, the Zetas. You talk about getting out to vote, go get them sisters and watch how quick everybody go door to door. Woodson understood that, and that's part of the solution.
Right, and I agree with that. And I do have that book. So if anyone doesn't have The Miseducation of a Negro, I have the 32 books that every African-American therapist must read, and it's included on that list. So yeah, I'll include that below, so people can access that. But one of the things about that I think is critical, if we do look at the work of Dr. Carter G. Woodson, and we explore some of the concepts in the book, and kind of align that with what you said about sororities and fraternities, I don't know that I see that that's always used as a reference point for our organizing.
It's not.
To be more along political lines as opposed to things that really can move the community forward. Now, I do see us do kind of like healthcare, education type initiatives, but I don't know if it holds the same weight as what is being asked for in the book, or if it's as specific as what's asked for in the book. It always seems to be a version that doesn't really get to the heart of what we need. It's kind of sometimes these very superficial, surface level kind of things that will have small impacts on the community, but really won't move the needle much.
Right. No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And that's why when we think about, man, you got me really thinking today. I mean, because it's hard, you know. I say that because the thing, and we know this, the thing about study, anything we study, there's a very specific dimension, and then there's a broad kind of ideational, conceptual dimension to it. When we're talking about craft, we're talking about the specifics. So let's take young people say, I don't like going to school. I would much rather play video games or play basketball. As one of my great teachers, Jegna's elders, now an ancestor. In fact, we were all together with him in the Nile Valley when he made transition in 2007. Asa Hilliard used to say, Asa would say, look, every human being on the planet is constantly learning. The only question is, what's the context for the learning?
Yeah.
You dope boys out here, you know how to hustle? Yeah. You learn that from somebody on the corner. You know what I'm saying? We're constantly learning. That's a craft. You understand? So it's very specific when you're talking about craft, playing basketball, video games, hustling herb, doing what, braiding hair, whatever. There's a craft to it. And then you get good at it. You can even become a master. And some of you can become master teachers.
Yes.
You know, man, hey sis, how'd you whip those braids up? Watch, do what I do. Okay, now, okay, a little better. Oh, you can teach this, right? Now, when we start thinking about solutions, what we need to strengthen, I think, in terms of our mental muscle, is the muscle of metaphor. In other words, this is one skill, but the thought process that engaged you in that is transferable to this other skill. Don't think about just the thing you're doing. Think about how that relates to something else you can't do.
Yes.
You know, so a kid that says, I'm a great basketball player, but I can't do math. You tell her all that is angles and perception. Right. You could diagram that play. Nobody just showed. So oh, really? Yeah. Tell me how you made that pass on a dead run and spun the ball in a race. Well, I was running. No, slow down. We got to give you some language. Next thing you know, she done diagrammed the whole, you know, with the formula there. But the bridge, the metaphor bridge was never built. Yeah. And that's why I say studying, particularly the act of reading. Yeah. There's very little that we could study or by way of reading that wouldn't allow us to transfer the thing we're studying to something else. Mm-hmm. It just requires time, patience, repetition. So when people ask me about books or things, I say, well, the books are important. Like you said, I'm glad to hear about this list. I'm glad you put in the link because I want to see it as well. Specific books allow us to build bridges to specific problems. Sometimes there is a very specific fix, and sometimes it's just about thinking about your problem in the context of how a completely, seemingly unrelated problem was solved.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, so I'll give a very specific example. One of the challenges we have now, of course, is this question of funding. Yeah. Well, you know, we've been looking at everything going on around the country. George Floyd, for example, the murder of George Floyd. On Friday, I was on social media. You know, I got friends in Minneapolis, St. Paul, monitor the situation, listening going on. My man just graduated from Howard last month, Nick Cannon. Nick, that's my man. I talked to Nick. Yeah. Nick was at the corner of 38th in Chicago. Yeah, Nick, crazy. He crazy. Brilliant brother, hardworking brother. Got a little crazy to him. Nick, where you? Oh yeah, man, I'm in Minneapolis. You in Minneapolis? Yeah, I'm at the place where they killed the brother. There's a mosque over the top of the place. I'm out here with the brothers and sisters. Okay, bro, you got your mask on? Yeah, I got my mask on. My point though, and he's telling me about what's going on.
He shoots his episodes on Howard's campus, doesn't he? For his
we did Cannon's class, right? That was in the library. Yeah, but you know, Nick is for the race. I can tell you that he's a race man. So when you see Wildin' Out, he's at Tyler Perry Studios in Atlanta. I mean, he go black all the way. It's absolutely right. And he's out there in the street, right? Now he got lupus, he got underlying conditions. Bro, you got your mask on, man. You got autoimmune. Yeah, I'm good. All right. So the reason I bring it up is because I'm watching all this stuff going on. And so I go on to see, because the Floyd family has a GoFundMe page. When I clicked on, it had like $3 million. Yeah. It's much more now. Yeah. And I'm saying, if they can raise $3 million, I know most of that money didn't come from Black people, but then I'm looking at other places, people killed, they got a GoFundMe, they've really exceeded the goal, this kind of thing. We say, how are we going to fund our institutions? We don't have no money. No, we have money. Even when we don't have no money. Yeah. I mean, you don't make no song like, I got 5 on it. Right. Okay. So you can't get the whole bag, but you got 5 on it. Right. And what the difference why you put that 5 on that bag instead of this institution had nothing to do with money. and everything to do with how you think. So
Mm.
a book to help us discuss changing how we think is the book that's going to fix the budget crisis.
Yeah.
But it's not a book on, well, if we get this funding, no. We'll work on the details of funding later. But if we change the way we think
Yeah.
and say, you know what, police brutality, this is crazy. Let's put together a little fund for the Black social workers, put up a page. Let's raise $10 million in the next 2 days. The money would be there and nobody would miss that 5 they put on it. But if the mentality changed, and once you get to 10 million, you make the investments, you make the and you can do all the work on the endowment.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even, you know what I'm saying? That's not even a thing.
Right.
If you got $10 million in the bank, that means that you can do an operating budget from now on and use that platform to do everything else.
Right.
Change in mentality. That's why I say it's hard, because that requires us to slow down, do the reading, do the discussion, change the mentality, and then connect to people's talents. And somebody says, you know what, I don't know nothing about building no institution, but you know, I have a degree in accounting and we won't miss a penny. Okay, see, your job is the books.
Yeah.
Your job is not to get the building. Your job is not to do the plumbing. This is what Woodson is writing in Miseducation. We all got a skill, but our minds have to change.
Yeah, and I think along with that, and then we'll get into the last question after I'll say this, but you know, crisis brings that emotionality in people to where they're eager to find something to do. They want to do something. So in these moments, you'll notice that people are more willing and more apt to give. But when we talk about long-term and strategy and planning, the things that really take time to create and develop, those are oftentimes when I see the momentum falls off, because we're doing a long-term game and it's not kind of this immediate, what can I do? I want to do something.
Agreed.
So I think that sometimes inhibits our ability to plan for the long term, because it's not that immediate need that we see. We know the need is always there,
yes,
but it's kind of not that compelling emotion that we get that can drive the longer term work.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. How do we harness that moment? Because in this moment, you're right. This moment has us poised. We know we're not going back to the world that we were in before.
Yeah.
Our minds had already begun to shift as a result of the pandemic, which has not ceased, of course. Yeah. And then these killings trigger this reaction, which is born in part because of the vulnerability we're in this moment. We're not going back to the world we were in even a week ago.
Yeah.
You know, it's crazy to think everything that has transpired that we're facing now in terms of people out in the streets has happened since we've been on since a week ago. We were on this call. This time last week, we having this call. George Floyd's live. I mean, it's like, it's unbelievable. I mean, you know what I'm saying? But the world has shifted now, and it's not going to go back to what it was before.
Right.
These are the moments, as you say, of crisis, when we now have not only the opportunity but the responsibility to think.
Yeah.
And even if we go back to other behaviors, if we can use this window for a certain type of shift, that alone could allow us to do work going beyond when things come back to a rhythm that's more recognizable. Yeah.
Right. So since we're talking about shifts and changing mindset and mentality, I know you mentioned The Miseducation of a Negro. Are there any other books, or can you give us, if someone wanted to increase their cultural education, their political education, can you recommend 3 or 4 books that you think would be good to move in that direction?
Sure. Often when we have these conversations, which is why I'm saying, y'all's list is 100 and what?
I'm sorry?
How long is the list that you all have?
Oh, it's 32.
32. Okay. See, so you probably could have swapped that out with another 32 or another 32 or not, right? The books are endless, right? So the question then becomes the question of curation. How do you pick certain books for certain topics? Typically, when people ask me about readings or things I think might be very good, I might say, well, is there a specific topic you want? So if, for example, Africa, we know we're all Africans. So then the question becomes, well, is there a good book for me to start to get a sense of the history of Africa? Then the sub question may come, you want a cultural sense, you want a historical narrative of the history of African people, and that can lead in different directions. So let's just take that area of Africa. We know we're Africans. Mm-hmm. It really depends. There's a very good book on the history of, well, there are a number of good books, but one more recent book, and I try to have recent books as well, because they tend to have the most up-to-date research. And then they have bibliographies that lead you to other books. Right. Michael Gomez out of New York University has written a book called Reversing Sale, where he says, can I do a small narrative on the history of African people from antiquity to now, that somebody could have one book and say, okay, now I have a sense of West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, North. I can look at the Egyptians. I can look at Ghana, Mali, Songhai, Monomotapa. I can look at all those other societies that weren't kingdoms, weren't empires, just small village people, that kind of thing. So Reversing Sale is good, the second edition. The reason I mention it is because it's new. But I mean, there are a lot of other things as well. And then I try to also think about people who may have limited resources. And if you have limited resources and many people are at home now, you got time, there's a very good, the United Nations, actually, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, commissioned, now maybe close to 40 years ago, something called the General History of Africa. There are 8 volumes. The 9th volume is supposed to be coming soon. You can go to UNESCO, the UNESCO, and if you play around on the website, you can actually get access to PDFs of much of those volumes. And then you can kind of play around. Well, you know what, I want to learn about Africa in the 7th century. And I want to think, I've heard about Mansa Musa or somebody, okay, go in there and search, and you can sit and read a chapter on, and it's free. So therefore, okay, let me go, because it's United Nations, they put it up. So that's a couple of, and then there are people who love fiction, and I appreciate that, because language is important. Yeah. And our best writers are masters of language. We know that. Frantz Fanon, what does it say? Mastery of language commands gives you a remarkable power. If you can command language, right? So, of course, we think about the Toni Morrisons, the Zora Hurstons, the great James Baldwin. In fact, I was thinking about Toni Morrison the other day. We read Song of Solomon when he had the 7 days, right? It's like, what are we gonna do out here with these police? Well, go read Toni Morrison the 7 days and see what you think about that. Because Ms. Morrison was a genius at creating language that everybody could read, but Black people would read it different because she's talking to us. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. August Wilson was like that. I mean, I remember August Wilson quote, which in fact, I just got a children's book. I don't know if I have it around here. There was a children's book that just came out on, no, I must have moved it. That's too bad. It's August Wilson. Yeah, you know how it is. You never stop getting books, and then the books overtake the house and everywhere else. Most of my books are in storage, actually. Wow. I probably have close to 50,000 books, but most of them are in store. I have to, I got to move to a place like Dayton or Birmingham, Alabama, somewhere I can have a house and then put everything in, which is my ultimate goal. But at any rate, it was reminding me of a quote August Wilson says, it's a children's book on Wilson, but Wilson said this. He said, I don't write my plays for a Black audience. He said, I don't write my plays for a white audience. He said, I write my plays out of and about Black experiences. And people then come to my plays, and in my plays, they find their common humanity. So August Wilson isn't writing like, what's going to make Black people happy or what's going to make white people happy. No, this is the sound of a Black woman and a man working this out. In Fences, right? When he bring that baby home, and then the sister's like, really? You done got, here go the baby. And she said, I'll take the baby. I'm gonna raise this baby. Today, this child has gained a mother, and you have lost a wife. And if you ever seen Fences on the Black people are like, yeah, girl, yeah. And white people are like, oh, yes. No, it was the same language, but right. Wilson is writing out of, if you're a Black woman, a Black man, this conversation. So Wilson's like, I'm not thinking about y'all in terms of talking to y'all. I'm thinking about y'all in terms of, this is what we've all heard. Yeah. So fiction like that is very important. So when it comes to our experiences and the traumas, the book I would recommend, even as we know the Morrisons, we know the Wilsons, is a book by a brother who's on faculty at Clark Atlanta University. Very good brother named Daniel Black. He wrote a book called The Coming. Okay. The name of the book is called The Coming because one of his jegnas, one of his elders who helped him, one of mine as well, but differently because both of them are writers and artists, is the great Sonia Sanchez. Sonia Sanchez from Birmingham, Alabama, lived in New York a number of years, now a resident of Philadelphia for decades. And that's where I met Sister Sonia, and that's where Danny met her as well. And she has a poem that talks about enslavement. And you know, Sonia Sanchez, she's a master of language, and she uses repetition a lot. So she's got this play. She says, you know, it was the coming, it was the coming, it was the coming that was bad. It was the coming, it was the beatings, you know, it was the beatings that were bad. It was so she just keeps going through with slavery, right? It was the coming that was bad. So he took the coming, he said, it's a small little novel, but it's the novel of the middle passage. And in the middle passage, I wish if I saw it, I don't know if I should have it over here, because I usually keep the coming somewhere close. But at any rate, he starts with a page going on to another page of just names. He says, you know, we were Obrafo, we were Yetunde, and he starts just all these African names, and he said, we were poets, you know, we were lovers, we were healers, and he said, yeah, and we didn't know when the boat showed up that we would never be at home. And then so you start with people saying, well, you know, I know we Africans, but no, he's going to enter it with our humanity.
Right.
The boats are not here yet. And so by the time, page after page, he's just layering on all of our humanity. And so by the time the boats come and these people are you are them. Yeah. You don't have to unthink you know, I'm black. No, ain't no such thing as black. You know, thing is, my name is Marimba. You know what I'm saying? My mother's name is wait, get your hands off me. You know, so before you know, you don't have to unthink blackness. You are in your humanity. And that's what reveals what this trauma tried to take from us. And so once he sets that framework up, then we have this yearning to return to what we were doing and who we were. And we also see that part of who we were that we continue to be, but it creates a dissatisfaction with where we are. Because now he introduces on the ship, here comes the white person. And we looking at them like, yeah, but we're not looking at them like we would be looking at Brad Pitt in 12 Years a Slave. We're looking for a heroic white to be our ally. No, this is one of them guys that got us in chains. No, so he's forever changed the way we think about the notion of a white savior. But this isn't sociology. So that we're not thinking about it in terms of, you know, achievement gaps. And I love the way Ace used to say it. You know, there is no achievement gap related to black and white. There's a gap between what you have done so far and what you're capable of doing. Stop comparing yourself to white people. Because first of all, they ain't achieved as a group. And, you know, but then second of all, you should be comparing yourself to what you're capable of and looking to your people to help you. So The Coming is the second book. Another book, we were talking about HBCUs, so earlier, there's several very good histories of HBCUs. The one I would recommend, The History of America's Black Colleges and Universities from the Beginning, is by one of my former teachers at Tennessee State, Professor of History, Bobby Lovett, Lovett, Bobby Lovett, out of Arkansas. He wrote an excellent one-volume history of HBCUs that goes through the history of all the schools, puts it in the framework, and somebody reading that gets a full sense of what HBCUs are, what they've achieved, what they had to survive through, and what remains for us to do. Two other books. There's a couple of very good books on the process of learning and how we can build community and be driven by culture. And there's so many, but Ayikwe Arma, you know, I love Arma. You smile, see, you probably know. Ayikwe Arma wrote a number of good books on it, but there's one called The Eloquence of the Scribes. Where he talks about how do you build as community and I just love it. He's got another one called The Way of the Followers, which just came out maybe last year before last. But The Eloquence of the Scribes, I teach that every semester for my Introduction to African American Studies class.
Nice.
Yeah. So those are a few.
We got a good starter.
Yes.
Any other one you want to mention before we?
Was there any? I mean, what as you were formulating and thinking about this conversation, was there something specific you wanted to target in terms of, even more so than what you said so far?
No, not specifically. I just know I was more so thinking in line with you teaching Afro-American studies, if there were specific books when you are teaching your students to kind of bring them along, would those books that you just mentioned be the books that you would mention to your students?
Yes, yes, yes. In fact, let me add one more that I think is important as well. From maybe 1906, 07 through very near the end of his life, W.E.B. Du Bois would give talks at Black colleges. He gave 7 or 8 commencement speeches at HBCUs. Fisk, he did like 3 times. Howard, he did. And then he gave other talks to Black teachers. He gave a talk in 1960. You know, he lived to 1963, but he moved to Ghana shortly thereafter. He and his wife, Shirley Graham. He went to Johnson C. Smith, now Johnson C. Smith University, 1960, and he gave a talk to Black social science teachers, high school teachers, college teachers, faculty. And the talk was about what was going to happen after integration. And it's called Whither Now and Why. And he says, the problem isn't going to be the law very soon. These laws are going to change. He said, when these laws change and desegregation comes, he says, then we're going to have to face the real problem. He says, the real question we're going to have to ask, this is exactly in your wheelhouse, Monica, as you raised this topic we're talking about today. He said, the real question we're going to ask is the question of race and culture. He said, once the laws change, you're going to have to decide whether you want to be an American only, which means your race will disappear and you assimilate, or whether you're going to preserve your culture and make it as effective and valuable a contribution to modern society as it was to medieval and ancient society. He said, that's the real question. The question ain't Jim Crow. Them laws are going to change. We're going to bust that down. But once that law, and I'm talking about in the space of like 7-8 pages, he says, if we're not careful, this is what's going to happen. He says, you're going to have Black kids who get these integrated schools and they ain't going to want to go to school. And then they're going to start getting in trouble. It's like he's sitting in 1960 and seeing everything that happened. He said, but the problem is race and culture. The problem is the law now, but we're going to get these laws changed. That is the last speech in the book. It's the 10th chapter in the book. These 10 talks together are in a little book that I recommend all Black people read and discuss together. It's called The Education of Black People by W.E.B. Du Bois. The first one in the book, Hampton. He goes to Hampton. He says, you know what? Me and Booker T, I think we got this wrong. It ain't liberal arts versus vocational education. We need them both. But so in other words, people say, oh, Du Bois versus, but no, y'all ain't even read Du Bois. Du Bois tried to squash that beef in 1906 in a speech called The Hampton Idea. He said, because I'm going to tell you right, this is what Du Bois says. I'm going to tell you right now, any skill that they're training us to do now, by the time we learn that skill, it's going to be obsolete. Do you understand that once you go to school for a skill, this is so that the people who are trying to control us can plug us into where they need us? And if we don't have a different way of looking at the world, by the time you learn that skill, they already moved on to something else. He said, by the time y'all learn this mechanical education at Hampton, it was obsolete already. Y'all already throwing away the farm equipment. He's saying this in 1906. That book, that's a book for a book club. That's a book for a study group. The Education of Black People, chapter by chapter. I'll give you one more example because I just love this one. 1930, he comes to Howard. He comes to Howard and gives this is the commencement speech. I'm like, I know that if I had met Du Bois, if you had met Du Bois, he probably would have been looking at us like, yeah, I don't know if I got time to talk to you Negroes, y'all rah black power Negro. I mean, because he was bourgeois, right? But he loved Black people. So Du Bois is standing at Howard now. He went to Fisk, but he's standing at Howard. He said, look, let me tell y'all something. The among the most vulgar wasn't the word he used. He said the highest days of the Negro college year are the days when you all get together in a vulgar display of liquor and fur coats. You have no I mean, he's talking about homecomings, right? He said commencement. These people graduating. He said, let me tell you how something. The name of the speech was Education and Work. He said education shouldn't be training you how to get a job. Education should be training you how to live. He said, and we're so caught up now in material possessions and trying to look and show people what we have that we have forgotten the purpose of education isn't for you to get liquor and a fur coat. But around homecoming, he said, you know what he said? He said, the mind of the Negro undergraduate is as dead as the mind of the white undergraduate. This is 1930. You know what I'm saying? And we can look right now where young people are trying to figure out, not just young people, but I face it. I know you've seen it as well. You see it and face it. I don't want to read this. How can I just get past it? Wow. You know what? We're going to read this Du Bois
Yeah.
He's talking to you too.
Right. Well, the good thing about social work is that we're required to have CEUs outside of college to maintain our social work license. So we have to continue our education in order to be able to continue to call ourselves social workers.
Yes.
So these types of readings and book clubs and education, we have to integrate that into what we're learning, so we don't miss all of these important pieces of information that can help us move the culture forward. And that, if I could, I would like to be able to talk to you on another occasion, because I
You
think,
have my look anytime.
okay, I appreciate that, because
Yeah,
I think this conversation of culture is so important for us as a community in terms of us redefining our values, reinstituting our beliefs, really defining ourselves as a people, not
yes.
even just from a Pan-African perspective, but for people who might not ascribe to all the tenets of Pan-Africanism, like what would that look like in the context of just being able to move the conversation forward around our education and our healthcare from a cultural perspective. Not
Yes.
sitting around, like you mentioned about Toni Morrison, not sitting around the white gaze and what they say we should be focused on, but things that we see happen in our community that we can begin to build policy and programs and strategies around. So I would love
Absolutely.
to talk to you about that another time if we
No,
could.
with great pleasure. With great pleasure. I'd be glad to. Glad to. I look forward to it.
Yeah, I thank you so much. Is there any last things that you would want to tell the audience about being able to connect with you, connect with your work, or?
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, you know, I'm easy to find. I mean, a little halfway website, drgregcarr.com.
Okay.
So there's it's kind of like of a dashboard there. And you know, I'm around on YouTube and places like that. And people can always reach out. There's a way to do that there on the website. So yeah, but yeah, no, I'm here.
Okay. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it.
Of course. It's good to talk to you.
Thank you. You too.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you all so much for tuning in to this week's podcast. If you have any questions, again, the links will be featured at the bottom of the podcast episode. You can reach out to me if you have any questions. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. And as always, be well.